Hi, my name is Sarah and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. So this is actually my third take of this video. I have filmed it 2 other times and had technical difficulties both times, so hopefully this one will stick. I'm going to be talking about The New Wilderness by Diane Cook today, which is one of the shortlisted books for the Booker 2020 prize. This also happened to be my most anticipated read on the entire long list. When I was going through all the different synopses and everything, I saw first the cover of this book and immediately fell in love with it. And then I read the synopsis for it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so perfect. This is going to be so good for me and my tastes. And did it live up to those expectations? Not completely, but we'll get into that. So The New Wilderness is about Agnes and Bee being the mother and Agnes is her daughter. They are living in kind of this dystopian world, and I struggle to say the word dystopian because I feel like that oftentimes conjures up images of the Hunger Games and Divergent, and it's not that, but it is our world that's gone downhill a bit, where there are negative consequences for actions that humans have taken, so the world's not doing so great. Basically, it's split into, there is the city where almost everybody lives at this point, and it's super overpopulated and the air quality is terrible, and then there's also the wilderness state, which is just this large portion of land that is just wilderness, and it's the last one left on Earth. So in this, Agnes and Bee, along with Bee's husband, Greg, so they're kind of like a family unit. Greg is not Agnes's biological father, but she does think of him like a father. So the 3 of them are taking part of this experiment to see if humans can live in the wilderness state without destroying it. So if humans can live in nature without causing all these negative effects to it. The reason why Bee wants to join in on this is not necessarily because this is something that she would like to do, but her daughter Agnes is having difficulty growing up in the city because the air quality is so terrible. She's having trouble just breathing. It's something that happens to quite a few kids, it seems like. But Bee has this opportunity to take Agnes into the wilderness state where she can get actual fresh air, and this does end up really helping. And then we join in on the story a few years into this experience. It's not clear exactly how long, just because time in the wilderness is not really kept. And as far as my initial thoughts, like I said, this seemed so perfect for me. I love dystopians that are not clear dystopians. I'm not a huge fan of the YA dystopian, although I will read them from time to time. They are very enjoyable and quick pace to get through, but the really realistic dystopians, I love those. So this hit that mark for me. And then I also love stories that are set out in nature, so that was a good one. I love stories with a closed cast of characters, and because Agnes, Bee, and Greg are living in this community of humans within the wilderness where they're trying to see if they can live there without disrupting nature, that means that we do have a pretty close cast of characters where you get to know quite a few different people and you get to know them decently well. So there was that kind of checked off for me. And then I also really like long adventure stories. It's not really adventures, but where there's long trips involved or getting from one place to another, which I feel in the story it's more of a meandering, there is very long trips, but you don't get to see each little part of it because the book does cover such a large span of time, and also time is not something that's super clear throughout the book because, like I said, they don't really follow a calendar. Sometimes they'll refer to time in seasons, sometimes in winters specifically, to mark more closely the number of years that have gone by, things like that. But still, there are these big trips that they have to do, so while it wasn't exactly the thing that I normally go for in a book, it still kind of had that feel to it that I look for and that I gravitate towards. So all of those things set this book up to be a perfect book for me. However, I ended up not really enjoying it that much. I mean, it was an enjoyable process reading through for me. I think I enjoyed that process a bit more than other people did based on what I've been hearing. But overall, as an entire story, it kind of just missed the mark for me. And I think that the only reason why I like it as much as I do is simply because of the premise and a little bit of the writing style. I did like the writing style. But as far as any of the things that weren't those things that made me gravitate towards the book to begin with, those didn't really like add anything for me. And in fact, a few things like took away from the book for me. So I want to talk really about 3 themes in this book. And I'm going to start with the one that I really liked and that I thought was done really well. And then I'll get into the other 2, which I thought could have been done a bit better. Okay, so my first theme is this theme of power throughout the book, of having power, of leadership, anything in that realm. It's really shown in a lot of different ways in this book, and I thought that that was really fascinating. So I've already spoken about how there's this community. There's already like power struggles within that community itself, who's leading it, who should have a say in what things they do. It's not a very large group of people, so it does make sense that everybody in the community can have a say in what they do. But as things change, is their structure going to change? Are they going to need somebody that's specifically a leader? And then there's a lot about the difference between somebody who wants to be a leader because they want to be a leader and somebody who just needs to be a leader because they have ideas that they want to kind of bring forth, that they want to enact upon in the group. Whereas somebody else could be like, oh, I just want to be a leader so that I'm there for any big decisions that are made and that I'm looked at as a leader. I can just like have that title. And then there's also the idea of somebody who's a leader just because they're more skilled at certain things. So there's like a lot that goes into that power dynamic within the community itself. And then you get outside of that and it gets more complex because we've got the rangers that are also in the wilderness state, although they live in these structures that are known as posts. And it's not really exactly clear like what their structure is made up of. You kind of just get like a little bit of information from the community's perspective, but it's clear that they are supposed to be like in charge of the people that are within the community. They're the ones that get to make sure that they are following the rules. They're also the ones that are taking down any data from the experiment, because in the end, this is supposed to be this experiment to see if humans can survive among nature and not like destroy it. And so if the community is staying too long in one place, the rangers will come and say like, you know, you got to get a move on, because part of the way to stay in nature and not destroy it is to not stay in one place. So they've got to be continually moving and constantly going to a new place. And then another level up from the rangers, we have what is referred to as the administration. So this is presumably a group of people that are kind of over everything. It seems like not just the wilderness, but also the city. Once again, we don't get a lot of clear information here. Honestly, I'm okay with this, and I'm glad that it made this kind of decision because I only really want to know what the characters know. So I really appreciated the fact that I only knew what B would know, or I only knew what Agnes would know. Anybody in the community, like I didn't get some extra information about the administration that I wouldn't know. And so it did give me that feeling of being on like the lower rungs of this ladder and kind of just looking up and being like, what are they even doing? Like, I don't even know what's going on up there. And so much so that like, I don't even care what's going on up there. You know, when like something's just so many levels above you that you're like, I don't know, just do whatever, and whatever decisions need to filter down to me will eventually filter down to me, and I'll deal with them when they get here. So I really loved the different power structures within this, that we would have the community with their power struggles, that we would have the whole world with that power, with the administration, the rangers, and then the community under them. And then in addition to that, Agnes kind of talks about how it's weird that humans are even thinking that they have any power at all, when clearly all of the power goes to nature itself, that they are really at the mercy of the environment that they live in. And that's even true of the people that aren't living in the wilderness itself, although it's easier to feel removed from it. I mean, we can all relate to that right now. Like, global warming is a thing and we all have to deal with that. And while it's because of humans that this is even a thing, we don't have the power to just like flip a switch and be like, oh, okay, never mind. It's really nature that has that power, and we are at the mercy of this planet that we all live on. And it depends on how we live on it, how long we get to stay here. But the planet, even long after humans are gone, is still going to be thriving on its own. Like, it'll just look different. It won't look exactly like it looks now, but there's still going to be nature. There's still going to be like the earth. So I really love the idea of Agnes bringing in like, well, we don't really have the power here anyways. Clearly, like that's what got us into this situation, is thinking that we have control over this world that we live in and not understanding the role that we should be playing in order to secure our own safety as the human race. And kind of piggybacking off of that, heading into the next theme of wilderness versus civilization. So Bee and Agnes really represent these two sides. Bee representing civilization and Agnes representing the wilderness. Agnes has lived in the wilderness for much of her life. She comes over very young, and this is where she's grown up. This is what she knows. She's also the eldest child in the community, so this puts her in an interesting position. Not only that, but she really embraces the wilderness and this idea of the wilderness. She doesn't understand why the humans are trying so hard to have everything go a very particular way when she sees kind of the day-to-day as who knows what could happen. Like, I have no idea what tomorrow's going to look like because I'm not in control of that. So I actually have a quote to kind of display this one. This is from Agnes's perspective. Who cared about why or how? Who cared about would or wouldn't? She never understood why adults were always discussing these words. Should and shouldn't. Can and can't. Is and do, she muttered to herself. That's all that mattered. Is and do. Being and doing. Right now and a little time from now. So Agnes, who has constantly seen their life be disrupted by something that happens that's not in her control, she sees no reason to need to plan things out. She just kind of puts one foot in front of the other and figures it out as she goes. Whereas the rest of the community, or the adults in the community, are constantly trying to figure out what their next move is going to be, and even several moves ahead of that, which furthers their thought that they do have some control over the world that they live in. And they don't really, especially considering that not only are they not really in control with the wilderness itself, but they're not really in control with the rangers and the administration. Like, they have these levels above them and they're at this lower level. Although an argument could be made that since they know how to live in the wilderness the best, maybe they are in the best position, but that would just be getting into even more power dynamics. So if Agnes represents wilderness, then Bee represents civilization. Like I said during the synopsis portion, Bee did not really want to come into the wilderness. She only did it for Agnes, so that Agnes could be breathing clean air and could have a fair shot at life, because Agnes was to the point where it was looking like she wasn't going to make it at all unless they were able to get out to the wilderness state. Bee also had to leave her own mother behind, who is still living in the city. And Bee is quite a fascinating character by herself. It seems like she really struggles with her own identity. She has a hard time combining who she is as an individual and who she is as a mother, which kind of brings us into the next theme of parenthood. So Bee is constantly worried that she is not being a good enough mother, and it's hard to see that at the beginning, because all you know at the beginning is that Bee uprooted her life and entered into a world that she didn't really want to be in completely for her daughter, which seems pretty motherly. But you see her kind of struggle with feeling like she is actually a mother and she's actually a good mother, or if she should still be her own person. In times of grief, she feels like she has to grieve alone and that she can't be comforting other people, which I think is completely understandable in some scenes of the book, whereas it's not as understandable in others. She kind of turns inward whenever there's any sign of things that are a bit unbalanced or not right, and very much so in situations that deal with any kind of sadness. And it seems like sometimes Bee is kind of resentful towards Agnes, that she should even have to worry about how Agnes is feeling. And this brings me to another great quote from Bee's perspective. "This is motherhood," she thought, furious and brokenhearted as she tried to let go of her own self so she could free her arms to hold up Agnes. So Bee is very much struggling with this, being a person with their own needs and then also caring for her daughter Agnes. In addition to this, as the story goes on and Agnes is becoming more and more of this representation of wilderness, and Bee is kind of unmoving in her representation of civilization, Bee starts to struggle more and more with her daughter becoming so different to herself. And you see this kind of conflict between them. And this is really where the book lost me. Already, I didn't really love Bee as a character. I think that the descriptions of her feelings and things were great points to bring up and things that I hadn't really thought of before. However, I think that Bee just wasn't all that realistic, and her interactions with Agnes were infuriating. And I'm aware that maybe part of this was on purpose. Agnes is a teenager for a lot of the book, and so maybe Bee and Agnes should have an infuriating relationship where from the outside it's just annoying to watch. But it seemed like almost every conversation that they had was Bee being very withdrawn from Agnes, and Agnes really wanting to reach out and be cared for by her mother. And they would kind of go back and forth with this, with Bee making these like snippy remarks. And then it would swap where Agnes would get so annoyed at this that she started making snippy responses. And then Bee would all of a sudden want to be holding or hugging Agnes or caring for her. And it just, I get that that can happen sometimes, that there's like this push and pull and maybe you never really get it going at the right time. But oh my goodness, it was so annoying that like every conversation it felt like that was what was going on. And it's weird to be like bored and annoyed at the same time. Like I was bored of the annoyance I felt and feeling that same annoyance several times throughout the book. Not only that, but Bee is kind of portrayed as being a good mother, but you never really get to see it in the story. You only really see it through flashbacks, and I can think of one scene, which in fact, when I started reading it, I thought it was a flashback because of how nice Bee was being to Agnes. And I was like, oh, we're back in a flashback. Because the only nice times that are described to me happened like before the story began, or happened before they even got to the wilderness state. It seemed like Bee really didn't like Agnes that much for most of the story, and that the only love I really saw from her was coming from before they were in the wilderness state. And it really made her character less believable to me, and I think that because of that, it didn't do what it set out to do. But let's just get into my very biased rankings of my own personal opinions and how I liked the books on the long list. So starting from the top, the rankings that I have thus far of the books that I have read and made videos of so far, that would be Burnt Sugar, Real Life, then Shuggie, Bain, The Shadow King, and Such a Fun Age at the bottom. For the New Wilderness, definitely not above Burnt Sugar or Real Life. I think really I have the opposite problem with the New Wilderness as I did with Shuggie, Bain. Whereas in retrospect of Shuggie, Bain, I liked it a lot more than while I was reading it. But I think that still, because I enjoyed this more, like the process of reading the New Wilderness, that this is going to go above Shuggie, Bain. Do I think it's gonna stay in the third spot? I kind of hope not. I hope that there's another book that I like more than this book from the long list, but we'll see. Actually, technically, I already know because I've already read 2 more books from the long list because it took me so long to film this video. But anyways, here we are at the end of the video. So I do want to know, have you read The New Wilderness? What did you think about it? And do you think that it deserved to be on the shortlist or even the long list, really? Also, if you enjoyed this video, please do consider subscribing for more videos like this. I'm getting through all of the Booker 2020 long list. We're getting there. We're getting there. If you want to see any of the books that I've done reviews on so far, then I will have a link to my Booker 2020 playlist, so feel free to watch through that. But yeah, with all that being said, thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.